I need to be on Collaborate? So...
You do. So I put a note there.
Okay. Yes. All right. Doesn't look like we have anyone on Collaborate at the moment, at least. So let's try and keep my eye on that. But hopefully all you guys are in class. I think, unless you have to, I think coming to class is probably a better option. Helps keep you more motivated, right? Cool. So I'm Alex, like Jasmine said. I'm one of the 3D instructors here at CDW. So you'll probably see me around in the next couple of years. I typically run like second year to third year classes. But I'll be with you guys for this 4-week intro to anatomy. So when we say intro to anatomy, right, what we're kind of also talking about is this is a bit of an intro to ZBrush as well. So if you guys aren't familiar with ZBrush, ZBrush is it's a digital sculpting program, right? So think of it like, you know, traditional clay sculpture where you make, you know, a statue of a face or a person, but we're doing it on the computer. And it's the, you know, the program that is used in industry for creating characters, primarily. Also used for a bunch of other things, but if you want to do character work or creature work, you're going to be doing it inside of ZBrush, because it's really allows for a lot of exploration of forms, right? Where in maybe a more traditional modeling package like Maya, you kind of a bit more carefully move points around. ZBrush, you kind of have the ability to just push and stretch things. It's a lot of fun. It's a bit more hands-on. And it's kind of what got me into 3D, right? Was discovering ZBrush and figuring out that that's what I wanted to do with myself. So yeah, we'll go over that. And yeah, what we'll be talking about in terms of anatomy over the next 4 weeks is more related to the human head and the face, right? We're going to be looking at the construction of a head, how, you know, you'd go about measuring features and proportions, right? And we'll be talking about a thing that you might have heard other lecturers talk about, like the planes of the face. I don't know if that's a term that you've ever heard before. We'll be talking about that and going over what that means. So what I'll need you guys to do, if you haven't done it, right, is get a hold of ZBrush. So a couple ways you can do it, right? For you guys, because we are at the moment, right, just doing a 4-week block, and you might not want to commit to it, you can get a month-long trial of ZBrush. And for the moment, right, just to get through these next 4 weeks, that's all you're going to need. So, you know, if you just go to Google and search ZBrush trial, you'll be able to get a trial version of ZBrush, and I think that should be for a month long. If you want to keep using it after that, right, You can buy a license, or ZBrush also has a monthly subscription, right, of about, I think, $30. So not the cheapest subscription, but it's also cheaper than committing to $800 for the full license, right? If you just want to keep playing with it, or you're taking another couple of classes that use ZBrush. But just for the next 4 weeks, right? Just get the trial and install that, and that should be good. Another program I want you guys to get, which you might already have, is a little program called PureRef. And this little program is free. So just search PureRef, and PureRef stands for pure reference, right? So go there, find whatever operating system you're using. So in this case, for me, it would be Windows. So down here, right, the creator of this program does, suggest you make a donation, but you can come over and get it for free if you want to. So put 0, press enter, and you can just get it. So what PureRef is, right? So in 3D or any sort of art, right, drawing or modeling in Maya, animation, you want reference, right? No one creates anything purely from just their imagination. They have an idea and then they supplement it with real life reference, right? To make sure that you don't make weird errors, or just make sure that your art is fundamentally strong. So what PureRef allows us to do is to easily manage our references. So if I can just get it to show up, here it is. So I'm going to change my mode to always on top. So it's just this little window, right? We can move it around, and what this will allow us to do is just fill it up full of all the images we could want. So I'm just going to quickly come over and create a folder for this class. And I've got some files I'm gonna grab from this other class I'm doing, because they are relevant to this class. Okay, so we can grab a bunch of reference images, right? Drag and drop them over on PureRef. And what's great about PureRef, right, is that we've got a lot of control over how big we want our images to be, so we can arrange them by importance, easily zoom in, zoom out, and navigate it. And yeah, it's a really good little program. So oftentimes, right, when I'm doing work, I have, typically I work with a dual monitor setup. If you've got a desktop, that's what you want. And I'll fill one screen up with my references, right? And I can, do whatever I want with it. If you set it to mode always on top, and you're working on a single screen, what you can do is just kind of scale it and just kind of leave it up there. And then if you are using Photoshop or ZBrush, it will stay visible over the top of that program. And that can be useful as well. Sometimes when I'm doing something that requires good observation, it's harder to then, shift my head to look over at that monitor. So having whatever I'm trying to reference right there, so I'm just glancing up into the corner, can be really helpful. So yeah, PureRef. You want to get familiar with that because it's very handy. So we're not going to jump straight into ZBrush just yet.
I just tried to load in like a picture or something, but it's only showing, it's not showing any like JPEG or PNG files.
In PureRef?
Yeah, PureRef.
Okay.
It's showing only PureRef scene file. Oh, it's like load scene.
Okay. So are you?
How do you create a new scene and then?
Yeah. So just launch PureRef. So you've got a blank window.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then if you just drag an image onto the window, it should just load in. No go? Now, we don't need to use a lot of Photoshop for this class, but it is handy just for me to use to draw over things that we're going to be needing. So let's create a new file. Gee, that was fine. Let's create 1000 by 1000. All right, so what we're going to look at today, right, is just kind of the construction of a head. So when we sculpt or draw, right, if we take a look at a I should have a folder full of faces, right? Now let's grab Peter Cushing. So if I told you, right, to draw or sculpt that face, and you look at that, right, like there is a lot of complexity in that image, yeah? Doing that without any sort of prep or foundational work would be extremely difficult and would require a very high level of skill. So what we want to do is figure out how to simplify that and build a way up, right? You don't start a race at the finish line, right? You start from the starting line and you work your way to the end. When you build a house, right, you don't build the roof, you build the ground, you build the walls, and then the roof, right? So that's just that's just how anything's done, right? You start with foundations and you add complexity. So when we look at, and maybe what we'll do is let's grab, do you know what? I've got a whole bunch of photos of me here that I've got for another class. So let's just open that up. All right, so if we, look at my face here, right, the first thing that we want to do is simplify the major forms, the major shapes into simpler geometric shapes, right? So with heads and faces, right, let's see if I can just get that to be darker. Get that to be, there we go. Now we'll make that actually a red pen. With heads, typically what we want to do, right, is with the top of the skull, simplify it into a spheroid shape. And then if we append a cylinder, right, that will give us the very foundations of like a general human shape, right? So on Flow, for this class, under week 1, there is a link to a bunch of files that I've uploaded for you guys. And some of these files come from a resource called Anatomy for Sculptors, right? Which is a really good series of books and tutorials. And this kind of goes over a lot of what we're going to be talking about. But if we take a look at some of these references here, right, we can see that with this statue, right, if we go back to the beginning, we can visualize it as like a spheroid with an appended cylinder. We take a look at this proportion, spheroid shape with an appended cylinder, spheroid, appended cylinder. Now, from a side view, what you will notice, right, is that the cranium of the skull is not going to be a pure, like, round cylinder. It's going to be more of like an egg sort of shape, right? And then especially when looking at it from the top. So what you want to be careful of is that from a top view,
It's not screen sharing, right?
okay. So from a top right, the head's not going to be a perfectly round shape. It's going to be more like an egg, where as it gets closer to the front, it gets narrower and it's fatter at the back. And that's because of the way that the skull is shaped, right? As we come closer to the front, it narrows. So what I've got here, right, is a skull from the Life Drawing Room. And what I want you to do is just, I'm going to pass this around and just spend a minute just kind of taking a look, right? Look at it from the top view and just kind of try and analyze, you know, what you see. Because what we're talking about today, you will notice, starts with the skull, right? Especially when we start talking about planes of the face. So look at it from the top, right? Notice that egg shape. Look at it from the side, and you can kind of see where the cranium. So the cranium's this round, you know, brain case, right? Notice how that's sort of egg shaped. Notice how the front of the face down to the jaw is kind of, you can simplify it into like a cylindrical shape. And another thing I want you to try and see are these things called plane changes. So what a plane is, right, is essentially this, right? It's like a mathematical term, and I think it means basically a point to another point, right? But in art, when we're talking about plane, it's essentially kind of like a square. And what a plane change is, right? So at the moment, this plane is traveling in this direction, right? And it will keep going, right? A plane change is when that direction changes direction, right? So if I was to add in that direction, it's traveling along, and then it changes direction, goes down. And if we were to, you know, add another one, it's changing. So that's a plane change, and that's what a plane is. So looking at the skull, I'm looking at it from, you know, from the bottom of the jaw upwards. And in the forehead, right, I can see that there's kind of a flat surface there. And then as it comes around the brow, it's got another flat surface, right? And that's a plane change, and that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the planes of the face. So try and just visualize kind of these flat planes that builds up the skull. And you might not see them all, and you might not quite get what I mean, but what we want to do is start learning to analyze our references and the real world, because the more that we can start to notice these things, the more that we will notice them when we talk to people. Like, since I've learned all this stuff, right, when I watch movies, I'm constantly getting taken out of what I'm doing and being like, oh, I can see that major plane, or I can see that muscle group. And the more that you're able to connect what I teach, because, you know, it can be hard to relate what you learn, right, back into real life. So that's kind of what we want to try and get good at. So just keep that in mind, right? That cranium isn't a perfect sphere. It's more of an egg. And what we want to kind of know, right, is once we've created this sort of spheroid shape with a cylinder, right, and that will give us the basic kind of silhouette of the face, we can start to split it up to find some major landmarks. So we can see it in this image here and this one here, and we've also got a couple of other images here that go over like general proportions of the face. So when we talk about proportions of the face, right, or any sort of anatomy and general artistic rules, we're talking in generalized stylistic terms, right? So I like to think of it as like a bell curve, right? Where in art, especially when we're first learning, we're talking about the rules that fall into this here, right? Which, you know, when it comes to faces and heads is like, you know, maybe 90% of the population. And then you've got these outliers, right? Like the 5% that fall on this side and the 5% that fall on those sides. And they are the kind of like exceptions to the rule. So because those exceptions exist and they can make things more complex when we are trying to learn, we are generally sticking with this here, right? Because while we're learning or while we're trying to get started before we want to add in some character and flair, it's easier to start there and then work out from it. So these general rules might not apply to every single human being in the world, but when we do it, it looks correct, right? There's no, oh, that looks like that's slightly too big. It looks right, and that's where we want to start. So what we've got is from the top of the head to the bottom of the head, the bottom of the jaw or the chin, the midway point, right? That's roughly, right, where the eyes are going to be. Or in this case, that's where the eyes are going to be, right? So the halfway point, we've got your eyes. So if you're drawing, right, and you're blocking out a face, what we can do is, find the... If you're drawing a face, you start from the top, bottom, you find the midway point, you've got your eyes. Then a general rule of thumb is from the eyes to the bottom of the head, find roughly the midway point, and you've got the bottom of the nose. From the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin, find the midway point. Roughly, you've got the center of the mouth. Now, be careful, right, with this photo here, because if I was to measure this, my eyes wouldn't be directly in the middle of these measurements. And that's because in this photo, my head is slightly tilted back, right? Which throws off, these two-dimensional measurements. So be aware of that if you ever use photos, right? That camera distortion can throw that off. But in terms of a pure 2D view, those are where those rough measurements lie. Another way that you can measure, right, is top of the head, bottom of the chin, middle point is always where the eyes are going to be. But if you want to get a more rough kind of idea of where the nose, because like these rules here, that middle point for the nose, that works, but I always find it slightly aesthetically not quite where I like to put it. So this measurement is a little bit harder to do just because it requires getting the finding the top of the forehead, making sure you've got that correctly. But from the top of the forehead to the top of the brows, right, that's 1/3. And if you take that and move it down, that 1/3 will find the bottom of the nose. And then you can split up from there to find the lip. So that, in my opinion, will get you close to where the nose generally should be, but it's a little bit harder than just dividing and then dividing again. From a side point, right? Let's find this image here, right? Now, what we can see here is we've got a box, right? We've got the top of our head, the back of our head, the bottom of the chin, and the tip of the nose. And what we can see is that if we were to grab like that head and put it in, it would fit like snugly into like a mathematically square box, right? I don't find that measurement super helpful, but is kind of like a thing about like the proportions of the head is that it would fit into a square. But what is important when it comes to measurement, right, is from the front of the forehead to the back of the head, the midway point, right? If we were to grab this here, the midway point is where the start of the ear is and where the back of the jaw is, right? So that's where you would put your ear. And generally the front of the face and the back of the head is like the same size. So you can kind of just divide the head from a side right down the middle. But when we're in ZBrush, finding that midpoint when we want to place our ears is going to be really, really helpful. So that's what we're going to start with when it comes to blocking out, right? Is just creating our cylinder and our sphere, a cylinder for the neck, finding where the ears and the eyes and the mouth are going to live, and the nose. And then once you've done that, right, we've got our first steps, and then we can start to work in more complexity. And this is where we start to get into the planes of the face. So you can see here, right, that there's like a construction build up in complexity. So we go from general primitive shapes, and then we start to find these plane changes in the features. We make them a little bit more complex, and then once we've got the complexity there filled out, we can start to add in forms, right? So forms and planes are different. Planes are a sharp change. Forms are things like the roundness of the cheeks, right? So don't mistake the two. Now, this is really helpful and cool, right? But until you start to be able to see this on actual faces, it can be a little bit kind of mystifying to what I'm talking about exactly. So what we'll do is we'll start to have a look, right, at finding some of these forms on actual photos. So, you know, I've got my face here. We've got my pure ref here. So let's just minimize it and let's focus on the very initial sort of planes, right? So what we can see here is this very sharp plane on the side of the face. And what that is indicating, right, is if we look at my face here, if we follow the lighting and the shadow right here, right, if we really kind of try and chisel these shapes away, right there to the corner of my eye, down from there towards my chin, right, you can see that like that's a very sort of flat, sharp sort of shape, right? There is some form on top of it, right, that smooths it out a bit. But when we're trying to break the face down into simpler shapes, starting with those planes really, really helps. There's, if we go here, right, and this is where if you were to look at that skull and turn it upside down, you would notice that plane on the forehead. Let's open up. So I've got one where I've tilted my head back, right? So if we take a look here, you know, once again, right, there's that sharp plane. You know, there is some round form, right? So form is that. Planes are this. But what we can see here, right, is there's a plane change there. There's a flat-ish. Now, like I said, there's a little bit of form, but it is still relatively flat, right? It's not bulging like that. It's maybe vaguely like that to like that. And then you can see this plane change here, right? Where it turns a corner. There's one, you know, on the tip of the nose. So that's the idea, is we're trying to simplify it, right? So we get the right shapes and then build complexity on top of it. If we were to then open up, you know, maybe some more recognizable faces, right? So some celebrity. So this is a actor called Bruce Campbell, who starred in a lot of cheesy sort of B movies that I enjoy. We can see, right, once again, right there, very, very obvious plane. you know, because of the angle, it's hard to see these ones, but they are there, right? If we were to tilt his head back, you would see that change in the direction. His eyes are in there. So simplifying him down. Now it's a little bit messy, but the general idea, right? You know, once again, simplifying and finding these planes. One thing I was going to show back on here, right, is just the, you know, the change of the plane on the forehead, right? So you got your brow, and then the nose kicks back in and out. So that's what we're going to be looking at over the next 2 weeks. So that actually brings us up into our first exercise, right? Which is for you guys, for homework, right? Is to find 3 photos of people. So either 3 celebrities. If you've got a good photo of you, that's fine. And I want you to look at this reference here, right? And I want you to draw over those photos and try and find those major planes, right? Try your best, but like just try and analyze, especially that big one on the side, because that's going to be very important once we get into sculpting the face properly. And that major plane, right, once I said, like I said, sorry, when it comes to the skull, right, is due to that construction of the skull and the way the skull is built. And it has partly, or a lot to do, sorry, with this here. Let's see if I can open that up in... So that's the temporal line, right? Right here. So that's like the corner of your brow. And what's really cool when we are talking about the skull is the fact that, you know, we can just feel our own face and find these landmarks. So if you go, you know, to the corner of your eye and just press in, you will feel this little ridge, right? Now, some people it's more prominent than others, but it is there, right in the corner. And that is kind of what's creating that major plane down to the chin, right? And it's a very useful landmark to know. Right, so on a actual, you know, face, it's right there, right? And we can see how that helps to create that major plane. So I use that a lot when doing any sort of sculpting. I try and find that temporal line, and it makes my life easier when trying to get things correct. Okay. Yeah, and so I've mentioned this book, right? Anatomy for Sculptors. So if you're interested in sculpting, and you're interested in character work, right? Anatomy for Sculptors is a really good resource. So there's 2 books. There's Anatomy for Sculptors, which goes over like the whole body, the head down to the feet, right? and goes over the major muscles and all that good stuff. And you know, you can kind of see there's some construction lines about how you would, you know, build your figure. Now, like I said, there's a lot of 2D drawings here, but this is meant for sculptors, so it does get into the applications in 3D. And then there is anatomy of facial expressions, which goes further into facial anatomy and talks about, like, you know, how the face can change when you smile or frown, right? When those muscle groups move around, and how they can change, like, the way a person looks quite drastically. So that's a really good book as well. I would recommend that you buy the PDF version, right? And that's because if you're a sculptor, right, you're on the computer, and I prefer having my reference just there. I'm on the wrong. Hold on one second. There we go. I like to have my reference there, right? I've had books before, and I find it a little bit annoying when I'm trying to reference something and I'm trying to keep that page open on my desk or on my lap, and I'm trying to go backwards and forwards. Personal preference, you know, I know people like tactile books, and, you know, maybe you can have a read while you're in bed. But if you're looking for actual reference while you work, I find the PDF is more useful. Now, if you don't want to pay for that, right? They do have a Facebook page, and they do have an ArtStation page. And they, for example, on the ArtStation, do have a lot of just samples of the PDF or the book here for you to view. And there is some free helpful gems just in there, right, if you want to look at them. So, you know, that is an option. It's maybe a little bit out of context, but it's still a good resource. Another good book, if you're interested in anatomy, is this here, Anatomy for 3D Artists. That's another really good resource. So I would also recommend that. Cool. So what I think we'll do is let's open up ZBrush and just have a little play around in there. Is everyone okay at the moment? Cool. Let me know if you have any questions. So we're not going to be going too intensive, right? Especially this first lesson, because there's a lot to take in, right? There's, you know, what we're talking about here. But I think what you guys will find is that ZBrush, you know, if you've never used it before, it can feel a little bit, you know, it's a little bit new to you, right? So you have to get used to that. And when it comes to sculpting, there's learning the program, there's learning what you want to sculpt, but then there's also like the tactile sort of stuff you have to learn. So ZBrush, right, is pressure sensitive, and a good sculptor starts to learn, you know, the right sort of pressure to press to get certain shapes. So that might take you a little bit of time to get used to. So I'm going to take it relatively slow and give you a chance to get used to the program. If you want to sculpt, right, the best thing you can do is practice and do these exercises quite a lot. If you guys are in 2D Bootcamp with Tim, you're probably already started just drawing boxes and things like that, right? And that's because those foundation lessons are super important. And if you can nail these foundational exercises, you will be a better artist in general. All right, so we'll come over and we'll launch ZBrush. Okay, so when you launch ZBrush, right, it's going to look something like this. This window is going to open. This is what's called Lightbox, right, which is basically ZBrush's internal navigator. If you don't want that, right, you just hide it and it will go away. If you want to get back there, right, document Lightbox documents, and that will open it back up. And what we want to do, right, is under the project tab, we are going to use this here, the Dynamesh Sphere 64, and we're just going to load that, right? So this is like a preset. Now, Dynamesh is a feature of ZBrush that is really, really, really cool. We're not going to go too into what that means today because it's a bit of technical jargon and I don't want to overload you with technical stuff. But Dynamesh came about in ZBrush maybe like 8 years ago, and it made the program exponentially better than it was. And it's basically kind of what really solidified it as the go-to sculpting program. There was another kind of competitor program called Mudbox that's kind of gone away. And it's basically because Dynamesh just kind of made ZBrush the be-all end-all version. So Dynamesh 64 is what we're using. And let's just kind of talk about what we're seeing here, right? So we've got the sphere, and if I move my pen onto that sphere, you can see two little dots, right? So what the two little dots tells me is that currently I have symmetry enabled. And what symmetry means, right, is that the side on the right-hand side of my screen with the two big circles, right, that's my active brush. That's the brush I'm controlling. And what it's doing is it's finding the midpoint of my sphere and it's mirroring it for me. So when I do something over here, it's automatically doing it over there. Now, if you don't see the two dots, you need to make sure you've got, and it should be there by default, right? But if not, press X, and that will enable or disable symmetry. So we just want to see those two dots. And the point of symmetry is, right, is that when we are especially blocking out in 3D, it's quicker and easier to do it as one big shape rather than do one side and then do the other, right? So, for example, at the moment, you can see over here, right, I've got what's called the standard brush enabled, and that's what this brush is here. I want to change it to the move brush. So there's a couple ways we can do that. Either come over here and open up all my brushes, or I can use a hotkey. I can press B, and that will also open up my brushes, right? So it's probably quicker to press B because I don't have to move my cursor over there. So if I press B, I want to find the move brush. Now there's a bunch of brushes in here, right? It can be kind of hard to find the move brush. So what I'm going to do is I know I want the move brush, and I know that move starts with M. So if I press M, that's going to narrow it down to all the brushes that start with M, and that makes it a little bit easier to see what I'm looking for. So I can see it here, right? So what happens, right, is I press B, press M, and then all the brushes with M show up, and they're all assigned a hotkey. So V is the hotkey for move, right? So if I wanted to do that really quickly, and I remember that, B, M, V, and that enables my move brush. So you will memorize some of these hotkeys, right? But BMV for move. So what move is, right, is it's like basically grabbing the clay with your fingers and dragging it out. And it's one of the most useful brushes. So you can see there are like 30 brushes in here. But the truth is, right, that you only need about 4 or 5 brushes in ZBrush to do something really, really awesome. A lot of these brushes are kind of just fluff brushes. So there are like pillar brushes, right? Ones that are really important. And the move brush is one of them. So if you press M, right, it brings up this little hot box. There are a bunch of sliders up here. They also exist. So you can see here, draw size exists up there, right? So comes down to what you're comfortable with. But if I was to press spacebar, go to my drawer, I can change the size of my brush. So let's make it quite big. And then if I use my move brush, right, you can see I'm able to move the geometry, rotate around. So to rotate, I'm clicking on the screen but I'm doing it outside of the sphere. If I click on the sphere, I'm going to manipulate the sphere, right? If I click outside the sphere, I'm going to rotate around. So the move brush allows me just to push and pull things. If I make my brush smaller, I can push and pull smaller shapes, so I can pull out that. If I make it big, I can make a big sweeping change. And you can see, right, that with symmetry on, if I want to create more of a specific shape, certainly easier to have symmetry on, because without it, I've got to move it here and then try and compensate and do it there. So especially at the very, very early stages of ZBrush, symmetry will allow us to, make the head shape much easier. Up here, if you want to go back in time, right, you can drag through your history. So one thing to be careful of, right, is to turn symmetry off, make a change, and then turn it back on, because it's no longer symmetrical. Can you see that my cursor over on my right-hand side and the one on the left-hand side, how that left-hand side one is just kind of floating in space? You can see I'm not really going to get the same effect anymore. So we want to avoid that. So when we first start, just make sure we've got symmetry on from the get-go. All right, so you can see here that I'm panning my sphere. So we know that clicking on the outside here allows us to rotate. But if I want to pan around, I want to hold Alt, click out into the void, move down, move up, move left, move right, let go of Alt, click, rotate, hold Alt, click, up, down, left, and right. And what we can also do, right, is you can see up here, we've got this little head. That is telling me kind of like the direction that we're looking in. So when the face is facing forward, I'm looking at the front of the sphere. When it's the back of the head, I'm at the back of the sphere. So one thing that we can do to try and speed this up and to make sure that we're perfectly on the side or perfectly on the front is as we start to rotate around, you can hold Shift and you can snap it to a view. So start to rotate up, Shift, I'm perfectly snapped to the top, Shift, I'm at the bottom, rotate, Shift, snap to, see if I can find the front. Got a little bit lost. When things are just a pure sphere, right, it can be kind of hard to tell whether you're at the top or the bottom, which is why that head is there, is to make that very clear to us. Now, another thing that we're going to want to do, right, is zoom in and zoom out. So this is where ZBrush can feel a little unnatural to people who are using it for the first time. So what we want to do, right, is click out in the void, hold Alt, let go of Alt, hold Alt, So you want to hold it first, click into the void, let go of Alt, drag down, drag up to zoom in and zoom out. So that might feel a little unnatural. Once you get used to it, you can move around quite easily, and it's actually quite natural once you are used to it. But if you're coming from like Maya or Photoshop, it can feel a little bit strange. But yeah, rotate, just clicking in there, Alt, and clicking in there to pan around, holding Alt, clicking, letting go of Alt, and dragging to zoom in and out. Cool, so that's the basics of navigating in ZBrush. We've got our Dynamesh sphere here. What I want to do, right, is let's start thinking about what we've talked about, which is creating that kind of basic head block out. So I've got my Pure F here. Let's think about creating something like this or this here. What I might do, right, is I might just push that up into the corner here so you guys can see it. And like I said, with Pure F, if you got the mode set to always on top, then it will just live there and we can reference it as we work. So there's a couple of ways that we can go about constructing this base head. And I'll go over both, I think, because one thing that I've learned, right, is that when teaching, is that certain people, right, certain students prefer certain workflows to others. I know for me, right, I've had a few different teachers in the past. I've watched a bunch of tutorials, and someone will do something one way that works for them. Another teacher or tutorial will do something slightly differently. And what I've done over time is I've picked and chosen different ways of approaching the same problem, and I've kind of combined it into my own workflow, right? Because sometimes, you know, this guy over here did something and it just felt a little unnatural, or I didn't get the result that I liked, but this thing this guy did worked for me. So I think what you'll find, right, is here we've got currently like 4 ZBrush instructors. There's me, there's Brian Wernier, there's Alex Colvin, and there's Nick Pill. We all do some form of ZBrush class at some point. What you'll find, right, is if you have us at different points, we'll all do things slightly differently, and you'll start to figure out your own workflow. One thing to know about ZBrush and 3D in general is there's no real like right or wrong way about doing things, as long as you kind of, the end result works. However you get there, right, the journey doesn't matter so much. Now, having said that, there are kind of tried and true sort of techniques for sculpting, right, back from when you were doing it with clay, that have translated into 3D, procedures that generally work for everyone and is a smart way to go about things. Some people do things, you know, slightly outside the box, and that's fine if they get the good result, but certain techniques are kind of tried and true, so I would encourage you to do it that way. So what I want to do, right, is take the sphere and kind of turn it a bit more into a head shape. So first of all, one thing, and this is one of those workflows that differs between me and, say, Brian Wernier, and neither one is wrong. So over here, we've got this button called Dynamic Perspective. Now, in the real world, right, perspective is a thing, right? As things move into the horizon, points converge, right, to give the, you know, that perspective look, right? And in drawing, that's what we're imitating, is the way that 2 points merge together. What you can do in 3D is you can turn that off and make things purely two-dimensional. And you can do that by disabling this dynamic perspective here. So if you look at the sphere, right, can you see how as it goes back into 3D space, we can see a little bit of the underside? If we turn off dynamic perspective, that will kind of disable it. Now, you don't necessarily want to do that because we are working in a 3D space. We want the end result to be looking right with perspective. However, I find that when following these sorts of two-dimensional construction rules that you often find in 2D drawing books, I find that it can be easier to turn off perspective when I'm initially blocking things out, and then turning dynamic perspective back on when I want to start adding in forms. So Brian doesn't do this. I do. There's no right or wrong. Once again, this will come to what feels comfortable for you. But I'm going to, just for the moment, disable dynamic perspective. And what I'm going to do, right, is move my cursor or my view so I'm on a side view, right? So you can see the difference there. And what I want to do, right, is I'm going to press Control, right? So, couple of things, right? Let's just quickly, I'm going to change my brush to the standard brush, which is just there. When I click on my sphere, can you see that I'm drawing that, like, I'm pushing the surface up? That's the default for ZBrush, right? Without pressing any buttons when sculpting on our sphere. If I hold Alt, it's going to do the opposite, right? It's going to push in. So Alt, when we are drawing on a sphere, will it like invert the action of the tool? So in this case, if it pulls, Alt's going to push. There's a couple of other keys on our keyboard, right? So we've been using Alt. If I press Control, and you can see it happening over there, my brush goes from the standard brush into this mask brush, right? So what the mask brush does is it allows you to paint a mask. So in painting or in traditional sculpting, when we say masking, right, people often mean putting some masking tape down so that when they spray paint over it, that masking tape is protecting that surface. That's what the mask brush is going to do. So if I hold Control and I draw on my sphere, I've painted this gray color, right? And this is like masking tape, where now if I drag my standard brush across, can you see how where it's masked, I'm not able to affect it? So the mask brush and the mask tool is really powerful because it allows me to manipulate my sphere in certain ways. So that's what the mask brush does. If you paint a mask, right, and then you come and you click out in the void while holding Control, that will invert the mask. So it's gone from this being the area that's protected. Control clicking out here has inverted it. Now the rest of the sphere is protected and this bit here isn't. So you can use the mask brush to kind of do some cool stuff. What I'm going to do is if I have Control clicked out here outside of the sphere and I drag, we get this mask square. And that allows me to square mask like a whole portion, right? So what I'm going to do is with my sphere on its side, I'm going to hold Control, going to drag out, and I'm going to try and get it to like the midway point, right? Roughly. Let go. So this quarter is masked. And because I've got symmetry on, right? It's done that side as well. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to Control click out here to invert that mask. What I'm going to do next is go back to my move brush. So B, M, V. Oh, I've accidentally opened up Lightbox, so just hide that if you accidentally press that. Sometimes, right, because I work on another computer usually, you get kind of used to where certain keys are on your desk. So when you come to a new keyboard, I sometimes make mistakes. So it's just a misclick. All right, so I've got my move brush. And what I'm going to do is while this is masked, I'm going to be able to just drag out that, right? And that's not going to be affected. And what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start dragging out kind of that cylinder sort of shape. It's not a perfect cylinder, but it's that sort of idea of dragging out that front portion of the head. Right, drag it out. Now, one thing that we want to practice with the move brush, right, is using different sizes to perform kind of different actions. When it's big, right, I'm doing a big move. But if I make it smaller, I can come down here and I can just grab like the corners, right? And practicing this, right, being able to kind of slowly and methodically manipulating our shapes is going to be very important when using ZBrush. Because what we're doing at the moment, right, which you might notice, is that this sphere that we're working on it's quite low resolution. And what resolution means in ZBrush, right, is if we come down here, this is button, turns on this wireframe. Can you see these little squares and triangles? The more of these little squares and triangles we have, the more resolution we have, the more fine detail we can put in. Yep. It's X by default. So yeah, the more of these we have, the more resolution we've got. The less we have, the less we've got. And one of the principles that we want to use with sculpting in ZBrush is when we are trying to block out our primitive shapes, it's going to be easier to do it with low resolution than to do it at higher resolution. Because it's easier, right? Just think about it. It's easier to move 2 points than it's going to be to move 1,000,000 points, right? So the idea is we start low, get the foundations, and then we add in more resolution. So that's what we're doing at the moment. Now, because I've got dynamic perspective off, one thing that you will notice, right, is that when I make a change here, Sometimes it looks a little bit funky from the front view because I haven't quite grabbed it the way that you would grab it with perspective turned on. So what's important when we are doing dynamic perspective off is that we analyze from multiple angles to make sure that everything is kind of how it should be from each angle. So when I come around to the front, right, I want to just clean that up, go to the side, clean that up. Now what I want to do is just try and give this a bit more of a sort of jaw shape. So what I'm kind of looking more at is this reference image here rather than this one at the moment. And I kind of want that sort of rounded shape there. All right, let's come back, right, and let's take a look. And I've got something kind of like that happening, right? So if I deselect my mask by control dragging out there to clear it, that mask is now cleared. Come here to the back side, and let's just kind of move that down. So we've kind of got that cylindrical shape, and we've got that sphere, but going back to what I said at the beginning of the class, right? From a side view and from a top view, it's more of like an egg. So we've currently got like a perfect sphere. So we want to fix that, right? So from the back here, with my move brush still enabled, I just want to try and add a bit more of a round sort of bulge back here. Come to the back here, and you can see that that sphere has kind of gotten lopsided. So I want to even it out from the back view, go to the top view, right? And I can see that at the moment it's kind of inversed, right? Where this is a little bit pointy and this is a little bit round. So I just want to come to the back and make a little bit more of that sort of egg shape, right? Now, it's not like a perfect egg, but it's more egg-like than it is like a sphere. And let's just make sure that from those angles, that is closer to what we're doing. So if you've got a mask like that, hold control and click outside your sphere. If you were to, sorry, not click, but drag, because if you click, it'll inverse. If you want to clear it, it's drag. Okay. Now, this is the only time I'm really going to kind of talk about Dynamesh, I think. So if we look at our sphere here, when I've pulled out my front of the face here, can you see how that tiny square has gotten really long and elongated? What that means, right, is if I was to grab my standard brush, if I was to draw here, I'm getting that result. But if I was to draw here, can you see how it's not really doing anything? And that's because the way that 3D works, right, is kind of think of it a little bit like chicken wire, right? Where you've got the wire, then you've got the knot, the wire, and then the knot. What's moving when we're sculpting is the knot, right? It's this bit right here. It's called a vertice. And that's what's moving when we are moving in digital 3D. And what you can see down here is because we've stretched it, there are none of those like knots, those vertices to manipulate. So what Dynamesh does is it allows us to recalculate our 3D in ZBrush and redistribute those vertices. So Dynamesh should be enabled already because we started from that Dynamesh sphere in the Lightbox tool. And if I come over to this tab here, right? So if it's not open, open it. This is the tool tab. And if we look under geometry, and under geometry, we look under Dynamesh, can you see that it says Dynamesh 64? So that tells me that Dynamesh is enabled and it's set to a resolution of 64. Don't play with this for the moment, right? Because that's getting a little bit too complicated. But because we started with the Dynamesh sphere, we've got Dynamesh enabled. And what that means, right, is that if I, without a mask enabled, right, so it's just my sphere, come here and I control and drag, it's going to Dynamesh. So dynamically remesh my sphere. And what it's done is it's put some of those points back in there while trying to keep the shape. And that's really, really useful. That means that, you know, I could come in here and sculpt some detail now. So that's really cool. So make sure that you Dynamesh that to get some points there, because that's going to be important. Because what I want to do, right, is I want to bring out my kind of neck, right? So what I'm going to do is flip to the bottom, and I'm going to hold control, and I'm going to paint with my mask where I think my neck should be. So painting it black. Now, one thing to know, right, about the neck, and this is a thing that people do quite often, right, is that the neck and the jaw aren't like completely separate. If you look at, you know, yourself or at someone else, you've got this kind of like mass here that fits underneath the jaw, right? And you can see it demonstrated here. There's the, in pink, that's the jawline, and that's like the mass underneath the jawline. It's not a perfect flat surface, right? Even if you've got a really strong jawline, there is mass underneath the neck. So what I want to do is when I draw out my neck on this guy is I don't want to do it without some of the jaw here, right? So I'm going to paint a little bit up into the front of the face here to about there, down to about there, something rough like that. Now, what's cool about Dynamesh and ZBrush and 3D in general is that, like, at this really early stage, it's quite easy to fix kind of minor mistakes. So we want to try our best, but don't be afraid about getting this absolutely perfect right now, because we can fix it up. So now that I've got something like that sort of masked, right, I'm going to hold control and I'm going to click out here to invert that mask. Going to rotate to a side view. And what I'm going to do, right, is up here, can you see that at the moment we're in edit mode and we've got the draw tool enabled? So the draw tool means that I'm using these brushes here. Edit means that I'm editing my 3D mesh. So we don't want to disable edit. But what I want to do is I want to move over to this tool here. So can you see that when I mouse over that, it says move W, that scale says E, that rotate says R, and the draw says Q. What that means is that those are assigned to keys on the keyboard. So at the moment, I'm in draw mode. If I press W, that will swap over to move. If I press E, that will swap over to RR scale, R for rotate, Q back to draw. So you can do that manually, or just remember those hotkeys, right? So W for move, Q for draw, W for move. What I've got here is the manipulator tool, right? So if you're familiar with 3D, like Maya, that will look familiar. And what that is it's just a widget that allows me to manipulate 3D objects. So if I was to grab it now and press down, can you see I'm able to pull that geometry down? But what I want to do, right, is I want to, like the neck, right, doesn't just come straight down. It's slightly angled, right? Can you see here? It's on a slight angle, so it's not perfectly straight. So what I want to do is I actually want to move my manipulator, and I can do that by holding Alt, clicking on that corner there, and I can move it down here. And then what I can do is while Alt is still selected, I can rotate that, right, and change the angle. And that will allow me to change the angle that that extrusion happens at. If I want to reset it, hold Alt, click on that little reset button, and that will reset it back to perfectly straight. But that's very useful, being able to change the direction. So we'll just pull that down right to about there. Now what you can see is there's a bit of a weird sort of thing happening there. So what I'm going to do is grab this little green square, and I'm just going to drag down, and that's kind of like putting it back into alignment, right? Pull it to about there. Clear my mask. Now, once again, those polygons are all stretched, so I can't do much with it. So I can hold Control, drag, and re-dynamesh it. Sorry, did someone have a question? Okay, so that's added back some of those points. And what that means, right, is I can manipulate that neck extrusion a little bit better. And what I'm going to do, right, and I think actually in your little package that you can download of references, maybe I didn't put it in there. No, there it is. There's this image here, right? So that's kind of like a little construction. Can you see how there's a bit of a back of the neck, little curve? So what I want to do is with my move brush, let's just add in a little bit of curve to the back of the neck, right? Because in anatomy, right, the construction of the human skeleton, right, in order for it to kind of be supported, the spine isn't perfectly straight. It's not a flagpole. The spine actually has like a S curve, right? And what that does is allows for like kind of pressure, right? Kind of like a spring. So the spine has some curve to it, and there's a little bit of curve as it comes into the neck. So it starts at the neck, and then it comes into the back, right, around the rib cage, comes back into the waist, into the pelvis. So that little curve is happening as it comes into the neck there. So just keep that in mind. We don't want a perfectly straight neck. We don't want it too crazy like that, but just a little bit of bend, right? Yes.
With the next thing, how again did you like even out?
Okay, so what I'll do, right, is just up here, go back in time just a little bit. So when I've got that masked, right, what I've got is in the move widget here. Do you see how you've got this green square? That's the scale tool. Okay, so if you hold Alt and then you click the little triangles here, you can move it around. So what I'm doing is just moving it so it's roughly where I want it to be. While I've got Alt held, you can rotate that circle to align it, and then letting go of Alt and grabbing that scale just to push it down, right? Cool. Clear your mask, Dynamesh, add in just a little bit of that curve in the neck so it feels a little bit more natural. Now, if I look at this from the bottom, right, that is a little bit wonky. So with my move, just clean it up a little bit. All right, another thing to know about ZBrush, right, is so we've used the Alt and Control key. We know that Control activates the mask. Do you see here how that's kind of a bit gross looking? What we can do is if we hold Shift, that'll activate the smooth brush, and the smooth brush will allow us to kind of soften up that ugliness. Now, at this very early stage, that isn't that big of a problem, but it's not a bad idea just to kind of smooth that. Be careful, right? Because this here, at the moment, sort of represents the beginning of my jawline, and I don't want to smooth that. So just be careful. Don't accidentally smooth that away. So just don't either move your cursor away or make it smaller. And let's just clean up this bit on the neck that's a bit ugly, but not touch the jaw. The smooth brush is really good because it helps you clean up your surfaces. But as you get better with ZBrush, you'll be able to use it to kind of help you get certain shapes, right? By smoothing a certain sharp edge just enough that it will automatically kind of collapse into what you want. That comes with experience, right? So don't worry about that right now. All right, what I want to do is with my move brush, grab that there, and let's just point a bit more of like a chin shape, right? Maybe just round out that front of the head. Maybe you can see that that jaw in this image here kind of goes back a bit. So let's angle that back just a tad. Maybe push it up just a little bit. Okay. Looking at it from the front. Just give it a bit of a adjustment. Now the neck, kind of from the back, right, will vaguely line up with the corner of the jaw. So we don't want it to be too fat, right? So from a front view, we don't want to see that. It kind of roughly will line up with the corner of the jaw. Okay. Looking at it from the top, right, just make sure that we've got that roundish egg shape. Cool. All right. So this is where it might get slightly confusing for you guys. When I press W, right, I'm activating that gizmo tool. There is another tool that exists in ZBrush, right, that we can activate while we've got W enabled by pressing Y. And what that does, right, and you can see it happening there, is it swaps between that gizmo and this line tool. Now, it's kind of like a preference thing. This existed before they added in this new tool. You don't have to use this, but what I like about this, right, is that if I click there and then I drag down, do you see how it's got a start, a middle, and an end point? You can kind of use this tool to kind of like roughly measure, because it will show you the midpoint, right? So what I can do is I can come to the front of my sphere, click, and then drag, and then if I hold shift, it will snap, right, into an increment really straight. And I can drag it out to the back, and then I can use that to kind of see that, yes, that jaw is at the midpoint of the head, right? And if you remember, I said that the ear starts from the midpoint. So that tells me that that's kind of in the right spot. If I click from the bottom, hold shift to snap, and kind of just align it with the top of the head, I can see roughly, right, that here, maybe I might just need to adjust that a little bit. That there is roughly where the eye line should be. So what I'm going to do, right, is a little trick I use often, is by using the hotkeys, I'm going to press Q to go back into draw mode, come over, and in here, I'm going to find a thing called the Damon Standard tool. So it starts with a D, going to press D, and here it is, Damon Standard under S. And what this tool does, right, is it's kind of like, imagine you've got a ball of clay and you've got a sewing needle and you drag that needle over the clay. That's kind of what the Damon Standard tool does. Draws little lines, right? So by default, when you drag it, it pushes in. If you hold Alt, pulls out, but it's kind of like a sharp needle. So I'm going to use that just to kind of indicate my eye line, right? So I'm going to press W while I've got the action line enabled, right? So remember, that's under Y. So I've got the action line lined up, right? So I know that that is roughly the midpoint of my head. So I'm going to put my cursor there while I've got Damon Standard enabled. Put it there, press Q to swap over. And while it's there, I can just kind of draw out a line. And I've kind of indicated to myself, that's where the eyes are going to sit, right? Cool. Now, it doesn't have to be like a perfect sort of line, right? All I'm doing is telling myself, hey, that's where I think the eyes are. Cool. So next thing I want to do, right, is I want to put in some ears, okay? So before we do that, right, let's quickly go down to about there, right? If I press D, oh, Q, right? Just kind of maybe roughly find out where the nose will be. Now, this is where I'm kind of like, I don't like that measurement because I feel if I was to put the mouth there, we've got a very small jaw. So there might be some adjustment to do. So let's go up here, right? This here is about where the brow is, right? That's the forehead. So I'm going to go to about there. And then I'm going to just shift that down. And I think there is probably about where I want the nose to sit. you know, about there. Maybe I'll move it down a little bit more. Now, the reason why I'm indicating the nose is I'm not actually going to pull out the nose today, but when it comes to measurements, right, if we come here, the bottom of the ear will line up with the bottom of the nose. The top of the ear will line up with the kind of the brow region. So they're really useful landmarks when blocking in an ear. So that's why I kind of want to vaguely find where the nose is going to sit. Now, we can adjust the size of the ear later, but getting it kind of relatively right now is going to be helpful. So what I'm going to do, right, is using the mask tool, right, find roughly the bottom of the nose. Oh, I just hit undo. Draw up to kind of roughly the brow. And I'm going to draw a bit of an ear shape, right, and just paint it in like that. Then I'm going to invert, rotate to the front, press W, press Y to get my gizmo back, and I'm going to hold Alt, move it to the side of the head, and just kind of drag out this ear, right? What I want to do is go to a top view, hold Alt, grab that, move my pivot there, and I'm going to grab that circle while I don't have... So if you hold Alt and you rotate that circle, changes the direction of that cursor and where it's facing. If we don't have Alt selected, it'll rotate the geometry, right? So what I want to do is the ears don't sit perfectly flat on the head. They do kind of angle out a bit because they're kind of like little dishes, right, to capture sound. So we want them to be slightly angled towards us, right? So let's just maybe push those back. Go back to my draw tool, go back to my move tool. And while I've got this still masked, right, let's just kind of fix up the shape a little bit. And let's just try and pull out the bottom of the ear. Make sure that that kind of looks the way we want. Now I've got a bit of, you know, what I might do is just with my smooth brush, just try and smooth that so it's a bit cleaner. Now, the only thing is, right, is this is looking a little bit big to me at the moment. Another thing is, right, is at the moment, that ear is quite straight. The ear, on most people, right, is going to be angled back slightly. Now, like, this is like, varies on person to person. Some people's will be straighter, some people's will angle back more. But I think it's more natural not to have a perfectly straight ear. So while I've got that still selected, I'm going to press W. Now, at the moment, can you see that that pivot is kind of angled out? I want to fix that. So on my side view, I'm going to hold Alt, and I'm going to click on that reset button to straighten it out. And then I'm just going to rotate the ear ever so slightly back. Clear our mask. And what I want to do is maybe make that ear a little bit smaller. So I might just pull that up. And it might not be so much the size as it is the width, right? So using the move tool, just want to, from different angles, right? Might dynamesh it just to fix that up. Just want to try and make that a little bit clearer. Okay, so let's start with that. All right. Next thing I want to do, right, is if we look at this here and we look at that and we go back to what I was talking about at the very beginning of the lesson, right? That major plane change on the face, I want to just kind of quickly add that in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that Damon standard tool again. So B, D, S. And what I want to try and do is kind of figure out roughly where that plane's going to be. So if we remember right, I said that this was like a major landmark that I like to use. That plane happens on the temporal line in the temple, right? And that is kind of like right on the corner, right, of your orbital socket. So roughly, right, at the moment I've got kind of a bit of a vague face here, but it's going to be somewhere about here, right? So with that Damon Standard, I'm going to hold Alt, and I'm just going to use that, and I'm just going to kind of draw in for me a bit of a, like, bit of a guide, right? That might be a little bit, we might push it a little bit further back. So that's the thing, right? Like, if you don't get it right the first time, it's totally okay to move things around. And I want that to kind of come down to about there, right? Pressing, getting my move brush, I might just adjust. So one thing that you guys want to practice if you're interested in ZBrush, right, is getting really good at using the move tool, because you can use the move tool, right, to just nudge things into the position you want, right? It's one of the most useful tools. And while we're at this really, really low resolution, using the move tool to just nudge things about will allow us to get some very complicated shapes that you might not expect you'd be able to get with this sort of resolution. Okay, so once I've got something like that, I'm going to use one final brush for this class. I'm going to go B, M, F. Oh, press the wrong one. B, F, sorry. BFA, because I'm looking for the flatten brush. So what the flatten brush will do is, as the name sort of suggests, if you touch your surface, you see it's flattening it. And what I want to do is, and this is something you also want to practice, right, is a lot of when we're sculpting a ZBrush can come down to how hard you press. So sometimes, right, you might see me or another instructor do something with the exact same brush that you're using, and I might get a slightly different result. The difference is that I've just got, because I've got a bit more experience, I've got a bit more used to the sort of tactile pressure that I might need to press to get something. So that, just be aware of that, right? So when I'm doing this, I'm not pressing super hard. I'm kind of just gently touching the surface, and I'm just getting a bit of a flat, right? Flat feel, taking my time, not trying to rush, right? Take your time. This is relatively a simple exercise, but that doesn't mean that you guys should, you know, feel discouraged, right? Like, you've never used ZBrush before. Potentially, I don't know your experience. So there's no shame in taking your time to get it right. You want to get it right rather than rush it to get it wrong. So just take a few, you know, take as long as you need to just flatten that surface. And what we're looking for, right, I call this like the spaceship helmet, right? Because it's kind of like, I can kind of imagine it as like a sort of science fiction sort of helmet, right? And I'm just trying to get this sort of shape in there. Just like that. To about there. And that's it, guys. That's what we're going to be our first exercise for this lesson, is just getting us to this point. Then what we can do is you can adjust this a little bit, because what I want is from a side view, this line and this flat shape, I don't want it to be too far forward or too far back. I want to see a bit of that front of the face, kind of like that. So when you are, and now this can kind of come with like experience, right? Like, I've got a bit of a visual memory for what I'm trying to achieve because I've done this a lot. So when you guys are doing this, pay attention to what you're seeing on my screen and just try and match it as best you can. And I'm just moving that temporal line out a little bit because I don't want that temporal line or that flat surface to do this. I don't want the side of the head to do that. That's a no. You want it to run back like that. Because what happens, right, is as that temporal line goes back, it fades out. And then the back of the skull rounds out a little bit, right? Also, you know, when we look at the skull here, right? Huge divot in there, right? Huge hole. In reality, that's filled with muscle, right? The muscle that comes from there connects down to the bottom of the jaw. It's what we use to chew our food. So it's not like some people's will be more extreme, but in general, it's filled in with mass. Push that around. You can use that flatten brush to kind of flatten the shape of the ear a little bit as well. BMV, just to try and make that ear a bit more appropriate. Another thing you can do, right, is with that Damon Standard tool, if you're starting to lose that shape of the jaw, you can just use it to kind of bring it back out. Now, you've seen that, you know, if we carve in, right? But what I use the Damon Standard for a lot is to, like, create sharp areas. So if I was to hold Alt and kind of drag it along the jaw, can you see how it indicates that sharpness a little bit? Another thing we'll quickly do before we kind of talk about the rest of your homework is I might just try and bring a little bit of that mass down there, right? What we could do, actually, is use that Damon Standard, hold Alt, just kind of drag it out there a little, and drag it down here. And then use the flatten brush, right, to create a bit of a planar in the jawline. Because as I brought up earlier, right, the bottom of there is mass on the bottom of the jaw. It's not perfectly straight like that. There is a little bit of mass down there. Varies from person to person, but it's there. Okay, and that's our first exercise, is to do that, right? And then what you will want to do is, before you sign off on that, is quickly using your move with Y enabled, just do a quick rundown of the proportions, right? So bottom to the top, to make sure that the eye hasn't drifted, because what can happen, right, is as you move things around, your features might kind of get nudged, and you might just have to adjust it, right? So potentially I might need to move that ear back slightly, because I've slightly shifted it. So just move it back. Cool. All right. So this is quite a simple exercise, but it's part of the fundamentals of sculpting a head. And also, if you're new to ZBrush, right, what I've said today is probably a lot of information for you guys to take in. So what I want you to do is to do 3 of these, right? And take your time doing it. And then once you feel like it's pretty good, do it again. Take your time, and once you feel comfortable with how you've done it, do it one more time. And what we're practicing, right, is not just the proportions. I want you, by doing it 3 times, to just practice the moving things around in ZBrush, measuring with the move tool, like just practicing everything we've done today, because the better you get at nudging things with the move brush, the better you'll be in the long run. What I then need you guys to do is present this to me, right? So we can look at it. So what we'll do, right, is over here, can you see the zoom? Currently, right, this white line, it's not actually our entire 3D canvas. If we zoom out by clicking and dragging up, can you see that it wasn't quite aligned? So what I want to do is align. There's like I don't know if you can see it up there. There's like a dark gray and then a lighter gray. that dark gray there, that's the boundaries of my 3D canvas. So I just want to get that white line to line up with that. And that means that we are actually like, because otherwise you'd have a lot of wasted space at the top and the bottom. And what I want to do, so let's just frame, turn off the floor by clicking on that, frame the face there. And what I want to do is come up to Document, ZAppLink Properties, and I'm going to click on Front Right. And what that's done is that's stored a snapshot of that front view. So if I was to move my angle, come back, and then click on Front, it snapped back. What it's also done though, is it has taken a snapshot of the back. And at the moment, I'm not too concerned about the back view. So let's go clear to, click on back to get rid of it, so that back doesn't exist anymore. Come over to the right. And actually one thing quickly, right, is with my move brush, I'm just gonna maybe just pull that back down a little bit. Okay. Let's come back to that document, click right, and that's stored a snapshot of the right side, right? I don't want the left side because the left side, if we're using symmetry, is the same as the right side, right? So clear to get rid of the left, rotate to the back and then to the top. And what I want is a snapshot of the top. We don't need a bottom. All right, so we've got stored front, side, and top views. And then what I'm going to do, right, is go to Document and click Make Character Sheet. And if you have Photoshop installed, what this will do is it will take those screenshots, import it into Photoshop, and it will save it into a little strip like that. And then you can go File, Save As, JPEG, save it, I know, let's just save it to the desktop, call it, you know, you guys know how to name your files for uploading, right? There's like a, on the SAM form, it tells you what the naming should be, but something like exercise 1, save that, save it at quality of 12, and then you can upload that, right? And what I can do is I can clearly see how you've done and whether your proportions are correct. And then what we can do, right, is you can upload those 3 and we can go over them next week. So that, right? So what I need you to do is find 3 photos of a celebrity, of a person, and draw over them. Try and find those planes of the face using this reference that I've given you, right? And try and figure that out. And then 3 of these base blockouts of like a very rough head, right? And then next week we will refine this and take it further. But this week it's just about getting comfortable with ZBrush and getting started with something. So that will be your homework. What I might do is I might do this one more time for you and do it in a slightly different way, just to kind of show you another way of approaching it. And then with the time that's left in class, you can use that as a chance to get on with your homework or ask me any questions. It's 40 past 10. Let's have a 10-minute break, right? Go get a coffee, just use the bathroom, let ourselves kind of digest the information. So come back at 10:50 and I'll show you this again with a slightly different approach. And then, yeah, you can get started. Cool. Does that sound good to everyone? Awesome. Yes. Sorry. So, all right. So if you've got a mask and you want to deselect it, hold Control and then drag out here. All right. So you upload the homework to your Flinders page for this class. So it's same as every other class.
Hey, you did put your eye.
Does anyone in this room have power?
Yep, I think so, yeah. Oh, it's very.
Oh, maybe it's just this one.
You have power? You have power. You don't have anything plugged in? Yeah, just update for everyone that listens to me talk about the timetable and how it's broken and all that. I've been talking to timetabling, I'm going to try and fix it. So, because I was like, I'm scared to send you guys anything because it's not. And then they found out that apparently that you guys can't see what stream you're in, and it's just like, we'll fix it. We will make it better. Yeah, I know. I'm gonna say no, but we're gonna fix it. So we'll set you on the straight and narrow. I'm basically gonna have a look at what class we're in. It's like, yeah. We would like you to trust what's in the timetable, and then if you go somewhere, like another thing that we've found is like, oh, some people are doing P1003 semester 1, and like before you would only do it in semester 2. So we're like, if it's an option now that it's like a new starter. Not that it matters. If you're not doing P1003, just pretend I didn't say that. But yeah, some people have different templates. Lots of spammers, lots of work, all that stuff. I have like things going in my head and then like things about saying. I'll stare at the wall for a while. Yeah.
All right, guys. Someone asked me a question during the break. They asked me whether it was possible to erase a mask once you've painted it, and the answer is yes. So if you've got a mask there, holding Alt will allow you to. Oh, sorry, not holding Alt. Holding Alt and Control, sorry, will allow you to unmask it. So it's quite a powerful little tool, because what you can do is you can, especially once you get more resolution later on, create like little complicated shapes by painting it, and then like extrude it out and stuff. All right. Has anyone got any questions after the break? Yes. Okay. Yep. So so moving the ears. Sorry, what was that? Oh, okay. Yep. So like that. Yeah. So what? That's cool. So what I did was I found where I thought the ear should be. Used the mask pen just to mask out the shape I want. And the reason why I did it from the top was just that it I find it easier just to kind of see the silhouette that I want. So with that tool selected, right, what I did was I inverted my mask, moved this, right, by holding Alt and clicking on the little square to move it to the location that I want to extrude it from, to pull it from. You can do it from any angle you want. I usually do it from the top just because it looks right. But once it's there, just pulled it out, right? And then what I did was the ears, right? They angle out from the skull, right? So at the moment, it's got like a fat ridge there. So what I wanted, or what I did, was I just moved this back there and then kind of just angled it out and pushed it back in. Just so I get the wedge shape that I want. And then using the move tool, I can further refine it. And that's what I did. It's just to try and get... Okay, yes.
How did you do the add more, I guess, polygons? How did you do that?
Okay, so so that's called dynameshing, right? So so what everyone should be doing is when we start this project, just make sure, right, that when you are in here, that you definitely are selecting the Dynamesh Sphere 64, because that will have Dynamesh enabled by default. So what that will allow you to do is pull out or stretch your geometry past the point that it's kind of sculptable. Can you see how I've pushed it so far that it's kind of breaking? So with Dynamesh, if you hold control with, like, you don't want a mask, make sure there's no mask, hold control and drag out here, and that will re-Dynamesh. And I only used it a couple of times while doing this, because what I try to minimize the amount of Dynameshing I do, because every time you Dynamesh, you can see that it kind of slightly changes in form. And what you can do with this really low resolution is you can get some really sharp, detailed shapes, and sometimes Dynamesh can kind of soften them out a bit. And it's nice. Like, I don't like when it does that. But don't be afraid of it, but just be aware that if you get something really nice and defined, that Dynamesh can sometimes soften it. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this again, and I'm going to do it slightly differently. So what I did then is kind of my preferred method of doing it. It's the way that I've kind of learnt to do it by watching tutorials and kind of combining it into my own method. But I will go through and do it another way, because you might find that easier to do. So what I'm going to do is come up to... Oh, and sorry, by the way, once you have finished, right, and you want to save, or at any point you want to save, what you should do is save it under here in the tool menu. So tool, save as, and you know, call it blockout underscore like 01. But make sure you're doing it through the tool menu, because there is another place, right? Under document, there is this save as there, or file save as. Now the difference, right, between the two is that the one under the tool menu just saves just your 3D model, and it's a smaller file type. The file save as will save your model with all the history attached to it, and that will make your file size quite big, especially if you've got a really detailed model. If you file save as, you can end up with a file that's like 12 gigs big, whereas if you just do it through there, it would be like 1 or 2 gig. So it's just I know, like, in the past, students have done that, and they've asked me to look at their work, and then they submit like a 50 gigabyte file, and it's just, at the end of the day, once you're at this point, right, and you're happy with it, you don't really need that history anymore. It's kind of just wasted stuff. So just keep that in mind. So what I'm going to do is, after I've saved that, I'm going to go to document, Lightbox document, to start again, project, grab that Dynamesh sphere. All right. So that reset it back to this default. So make sure you save it first before you do that. All right, so using this as a reference, right, I'm going to try and do this again, but doing it a bit more in this fashion here. So I might keep dynamic perspective on this time. I usually turn that off just because I find easier when doing these very kind of mathematical measurements, but it doesn't make that big of a difference. So what I'm going to do is create this egg shape, right? Okay. What I'm then going to do is go here, right? Under my tools palette, there's this thing here called subtool. And what that is, that's kind of like a layer stack inside of ZBrush. So at the moment you can see polysphere, and that is this here. What I'm going to do is, under append, I'm going to add this cylinder, right? So at the moment I've got two objects. I've got my sphere and I've got my cylinder. You can see that the cylinder is grayed out, and that's because my sphere is the one that's active. If I select the cylinder, it inverts, right? Now the cylinder is white and the sphere is dark. So that means that my cylinder is now the active tool. And what I'm going to do is, with my move, I'm going to turn off that. I'm just going to move that cylinder into place, right? And I'm looking at this here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to position that sphere so it's more like we're seeing in this demonstration. So what I can do is, with this move tool, if you click this button right in the middle, that will allow me to scale it uniformly, meaning that in all areas it's getting scaled up. If you scale it from the top, it will squish it. If you scale it from there, it will squish it, right? The middle would do it all at once. So I'm doing that because I want to make it smaller, so I can do this without distorting the shape. So just kind of roughly put it there, right? I'm going to come back over here, append. I'm going to append another cylinder. Going to grab that one, and let's kind of do what we can see of the neck. So bring it down. I might scale it a little bit, rotate it, because as we can see, the neck needs to be slightly on an angle. And I'm just going to try and position it so it's kind of in the same position that I'm seeing in my demonstration here. Now, you don't have to do it this way. I'm just showing it as a alternative to how you could do it, because, you know, different people have different preferences. Cool. got something vaguely like that. Now, what I can do, right, is if I go back to my sphere and come down here to merge, I can merge down, and that's combined that into like one layer. Then what I can do is go over to my drawer, and I can hold control and drag, and I can Dynamesh it together. So it's combined it into one solid bit of geometry. And then what I can do is maybe use my smooth brush, just kind of clean it up. And I've got that sort of basic sort of shape. And if that, I think there's a little bit of work to do here still, but if you find that easier to kind of get those basic shapes going that way, that's fine. As long as, like I said, how you get there doesn't matter. As long as at the end, it's how it should be. So what I might do is grab, and just quickly, one of the cool things about the masking, right? Like I said, being able to mask an area so we can't touch it is useful, because I don't want to disturb that bottom there, but I want to kind of pull that jawline up a little. So I've masked it so I can't accidentally mess with it. Okay. Push that neck down a bit. All right, so what I'm going to do is let's try and roughly find the eye line, right? Just, even if we change it, I just want to get a rough idea of where it is. What I'm going to do is this time I'm going to try and find that temporal plane sooner than later. It's one of those things I like to try and get quite early, because it helps me really visualize what I'm trying to do. So going back to my flatten brush, I'm going to just start trying to work it in. Come in, try and pull a bit of that mass out. Might just smooth that corner, right? And that's kind of collapsing. So there's a couple of other brushes that I would normally use that I haven't talked about today, just because I don't want to overload you. So try and get this with what I've told you today, and next week we can add in a brush or two, right?
How do you say we did with the, all the different stuff? We love the client again.
Sorry?
How do you say?
Oh, the screenshots. Yep. So under document, right? You come through to this Z app link properties, and in there you can create. Oh. Did I just crash? Oh no, clear. Yep. So I went through and made the different screenshots that I wanted. And then once I'm happy with that, make character sheet, and that will export it to Photoshop for me. Now, some of my students in the past have found doing the ears this way easier. So I'm going to append a sphere. Right, grab that sphere. I'm going to move it over here, scale it down, and I'm going to like try and make it out of the sphere and then combine it with the rest of my model. So it's a personal preference. You know, doesn't really bother me how you go about it. So I'm using my flatten brush to try and create that more angled sort of look out of that sphere. My opinion, I think this is a little bit messier, but my students have, in the past, some of them have found this to be helpful. So I'm going to use my Damon standard to help try and drag and draw out that sort of shape I want. Like that. Just to kind of create a bit more of that sort of ear shape. Use the flat smaller because it's a little big at the moment. All right, let's quickly see if I need to adjust my eye height. Yeah, so it needs to come down just a tad. And then I'm going to put the nose about there. All right, so I've got this ear, right? And at the moment, it's only on this side of my model. So what I'm going to do is with that ear selected in the subtool, going to hit duplicate. So I've got two of it now. And then I'm going to come down to the deformation mirror. And that's flipped one to the other side. And then what I'm going to do is grab the head, merge down, Control, drag to Dynamesh it together. So that's another option. That one has a few more steps to get to this point using that technique. So the other one, I think, is maybe a little less confusing just because it's, if you're new to ZBrush, it's not as many actions. But I know that sometimes different approaches work for different people. All right, so we've got about 50 minutes left. So what I'll get you guys to do is work on either drawing your planes or mucking around with ZBrush and giving this a go. I'm here if you guys have any questions, and I'm happy to to answer them.
How do we know which, in like Lightbox, which CPU we can use? Because
There's
half the name's cut off.
yeah, okay. So Dynamesh Lightbox project. So if you click on it, it will show you what the last part is. So Dynamesh sphere, click on it, it says 128. So you don't. Yep, does that work? Cool.
And we need which one? 60?
I'm using the 64. So there's three. There's 32, 64, 128. It doesn't really matter which one you use, but from my experience, 64 is the easiest one to deal with at the moment.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. How do you make the document border wider? Like if it's like closing in too much and you can't see much of it?
This here.
Yeah, oh, no, the edges.
So there's that zoom.
Yeah, so when you zoomed out and then it's all grey on the outside, like a
Okay, yeah. So that's that border is just wasted space. So you just want to just kind of fill your screen. Cool. So, I thought I'd just show you guys a couple of ArtStation artists, or just artists, sorry, that I really like. If you guys aren't familiar with ArtStation, it's something that you should get familiar with. It's the best place to post your work, and also a great place to just kind of go and check out, because it's where all the industry guys are posting their work. So like on the front page, right, you will see all kinds of awesome things showing up. So every day I kind of check it out just to see what people are up to. But a couple of like my favorite artists, like I'm really into sculpting faces. I think, you know, they're really good digital portraits. So these are a couple of artists that are really good. So Rafael Grassetti, he's the art director at Sony Santa Monica, the lead artist on God of War, and he's a really good dude. Instagram is a great place to follow artists, right? Especially people like Rafael, because ArtStation is posting his like best work, whereas on Instagram he'll post like daily things he's up to, like just sketches and quick pieces. But he's someone that, if you're interested in this sort of stuff, is really worth following. Rafael Grassetti as well has a couple of tutorials out there that are really good. Tutorials related to doing anatomy, tutorials related to doing kind of these sorts of images where it's a sculpt in ZBrush that he then does a bunch of tricks over the top to get them all painted up. A little bit quicker than doing it the full CG way. So he's got a couple of tutorials on that, but yeah, just a really great artist. Chris Costa is a guy that works at ILM, so Industrial Light Magic, and he does these really hardcore, realistic digital portraits. And he's a great guy as well. And he has he runs occasionally some online classes where he kind of does this sort of stuff. Hossein Diba is another dude that's really cool and has a very active Instagram. So he, you know, I kind of started following him back when he was doing a lot of these likeness sculpts for like WWE. And what's cool, right, is getting involved with things like Instagram and ArtStation, because if you want to become, you know, a successful artist, becoming sort of known in the industry by using things like Instagram and ArtStation, right, can lead to a lot of work. Because I know with Hossein Diba, right, especially in the last couple of years, I've seen him go from like posting a lot of these WWE sort of jobs he's done to being like, oh, by the way, here's the 5 or 6 characters I did freelance for Cyberpunk. Or, you know, like last week or so, he's like, oh, I was asked by Blizzard to do the character art for the sorceress for the remake of Diablo 2, right? He lives in like Spain or something, but because he's so good, he just gets approached to do, you know, random freelance jobs. So he's in Istanbul. Yeah, so that's something to think about, right? Is kind of creating a bit of an online following. But yeah, really great artists. Frank Zeng works at Naughty Dog, and he's one of their lead character artists for, like, you know, their Last of Us and Uncharted. Once again, a really good, realistic sort of artist. Kubis is also doing some really cool digital portraits and likenesses. And this guy here, right, he does a lot of digital portraits, but what he's been doing lately is a lot of like a series of recreations of people that we don't actually have photos of. And what he's doing is, you know, getting information like, you know, his life mask, statues that existed of them at the time, or portraits that were painted of them, and taking that information to try and then recreate them more realistically, right? And he, does a lot of really cool likenesses as well. And then yeah, so I just thought I'd you guys should start to know, the sort of artists that are doing work that you're interested in. You will learn a lot even just by looking at their art stations. What we're learning today as well, right, is great if you want to do these sorts of realistic portraits, but they translate to pretty much everything that has some sort of like humanoid sort of feature, right? So if you want to do more aliens and creatures that are humanoid, knowing these rules, right, these proportions and things like that will help you create believable alien creatures, right? Because they are generally like, unless you're really going out of your way to make it alien, they tend to be, based on with human-like features, right? Like if you think to Avatar, right? The Na'vi, right? They're very cat-like, but also very human, and they're very human because they want you to connect with them, right? So they've got to have human elements. Human beings are very social creatures, and we relate to faces, right? And expressions and stuff. So being able to find those elements that we relate to create a creature that you want to empathize with is important, and learning just the basic rules, right? And getting good at this sort of stuff will help you create, believable fantasy creatures. Also important if you're more interested in stylized stuff, right? Because stylized is, I think sometimes people think stylized is anything, right? That's not realistic, but that potentially gets you bad stylized, right? Because just because it's not realistic doesn't mean it's good. Good stylized is distilling those really important fundamentals of realism and distilling them down into the most aesthetically pleasing forms. See, there's a difference between bad and good stylized, right? And someone that's really good stylized, I would guarantee you, is very good also at realism. They just choose not to do realism, but they understand it and they could do it. So that's my little diatribe there. But sign up to ArtStation, follow these people. Because they're great reference and great inspiration.
Are you saying we should sign up for ArtStation now?
Within the next week, definitely. There's no reason not to be signed up for ArtStation. You can.
Like to browse or to post or both?
Let's start off with just browsing. But maybe on your Instagram. I think ArtStation's better to post your finished works. Instagram is the place to post your finished works as well as your sketches and your exercises. Because you can post it as like a story, so it only shows up for a while, and it's not meant to be, hey world, here's my best effort. ArtStation is definitely where you should be like, hey guys, I'm really proud of this. Here you go. If you're also interested in, I would assume with 2D, right, there are online communities for concept artists. If you're a 3D guy, you should still get involved with online communities. So places like ZBrush Central, right, is where a lot of these guys post the works in progress. If you're interested in video game art, Polycount forums is a great place to be. Because once again, right, those places are browsed, and the people posting on there are your peers in the industry, and you want to be connecting with the people that are out there, because that can help lead to work, right? If a studio is looking for someone and there's a guy that goes, well, there's this guy that posts on Polycount who's really good, we should email them. It's a good way to get connected. Also, places like Polycount have really helpful feedback that they can give you, as well as like if you just want to browse it and not actively post, you can learn a lot from other people's discussions and the sort of feedback that they're giving each other. So all that stuff is great for growing as an artist. We also, if you guys aren't aware, we do have a CDW Discord. So if we just go to cdw.com. That's an IT website, so we don't want that. No, you should be able to join the Discord from the front page here. I remember it being Discord, right? So, yeah, there's a Discord for CDW. That's a great place to chat with, fellow classmates. We've got pages on there for works in progress and feedback. So one thing that you guys don't want to be doing is being afraid of feedback, right? Feedback is what you want at this stage, and feedback from your peers is really important. So yeah, get involved with those sorts of communities and the Discord. Yeah, so if you there are a couple of ways, yeah. So at this early version of Dynamesh, right? If you accidentally desymmetrize your mesh and you want to get it back, what you can do is go down to geometry, modify topology, mirror and world, and do that, and then re-Dynamesh. The best thing to do at this point is not to let that happen, because it can get tricky to fix. Yep. So what I'll do is append. Just append a sphere. So if you've got something over here and you need it to end up over there, duplicate it, right? Come down to this deformation tab, and there is a mirror button there.
measuring keyboard?
Yep. So it is under the move, right? And either you click this red button up here, or orange button, the Gizmo 3D, or press Y, and that will do it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So you've definitely like if you are in ZBrush and you click front, does it just go straight to the back? Okay. Try clear all and just try it again with the front view and let me know what happens. Still back of the head. Okay. You make sure that your front is the same front as the little face there. Because if not, it will think that's the back. Okay. What I'll get you to do is just go save as, save your file, close and restart ZBrush, and then load it up and let me know if that helps at all. Okay, guys, we've got 10 minutes left, but I'm happy to kind of call that an end for this lesson. So just to reiterate, homework, right, is to do 3 drawovers of faces, trying to identify the planes of the face, as well as 3 blockouts of the head that we went over today. Cool. I'll see you again, I guess, next Thursday. Yes. So just JPEG images.